Snow fell like white ash over Manhattan, the night of Sheila King's funeral. The church bells had stopped ringing, the mourners had gone home, and the world outside was muffled in silence. Inside the marble hall of St. Augustine's, only one man remained: Lucas King. At 38, he was the face of American wealth, the white billionaire CEO of King Global Corporation, a man who built an empire from ruthless precision and ironclad discipline. His tailored black coat hung perfectly over his shoulders, yet nothing could hide the exhaustion behind those glacier-gray eyes. He stood before his wife's coffin, expressionless. Cameras had captured his every step earlier, the grieving widower, stoic, elegant, untouchable. But when the last flash faded and the door clicked shut, Lucas finally breathed, a slow, shaky breath that carried something between anger and disbelief. On the coffin lid lay a single envelope, cream-colored, written in the handwriting he once traced along her skin. To Lucas. He hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a folded sheet and a small flash drive. The scent of her perfume gardenia and smoke still lingered. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "it means the deal is done. Thank you for signing the transfer, darling. 40% of King Global. What a generous man you are." Lucas froze. His pulse quickened. He read on. "Don't look for me in heaven. I never believed in it. I believed in survival. You gave me love. I turned it into power. That's all it ever was." For a moment he thought it was a cruel joke, until he plugged in the flash drive. The screen filled with photographs: Sheila, laughing in the arms of his best friend, the man who once toasted at their wedding, saying, "You're the luckiest man alive." The glass in Lucas's hand cracked before he realized he was holding it too tight. Blood trickled between his fingers, bright against his pale skin. He didn't shout, didn't curse, just stared at the monitor until the images blurred. So he whispered, voice rough as gravel, "This is what love looks like when it dies." He closed the laptop, the reflection of his face warped on the dark screen, a stranger's face. An hour later, he was behind the wheel of his black Aston Martin, driving toward the Long Island coast. Snowstorm warnings flashed on the radio, but he didn't slow down. The world could fall apart. He wouldn't notice. The beach house stood on the cliff edge, silent and untouched, since the day they bought it. Inside, everything smelled faintly of salt and dust. Their wedding photograph still hung above the fireplace, two smiling people who no longer existed. Lucas took it down. The frame slipped, glass shattering across the wooden floor. Behind it, wedged between the frame and the wall, was another folded note, written in the same hand. "If you find this one day, please don't hate me. I just wanted to live without fear." He read it twice, then laughed, not the kind of laugh that carried humor, but the one that hollowed the chest. "Without fear," he repeated. "You built fear into me, Sheila." He sank into the armchair, the sound of waves crashing below. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer against his ribs. He thought of the first time they met, her red dress, her sharp wit, the way she said, "I'm not like other women," and she wasn't. She had been a masterpiece of calculation, wrapped in warmth. For the first time in 10 years, Lucas poured himself whiskey straight from the bottle. The liquid burned down his throat, sharp, cleansing. He welcomed the sting. 40%, he murmured. "You took my company, my friend, my trust, but not my silence." He stared at the reflection of the moon, rippling on the glass window. Somewhere deep inside, a vow began to take shape, cold, deliberate. No court, no scandal, no words. "You'll live," knowing I could ruin you with one breath. That will be my revenge. And yet beneath the ice, there was something else. A flicker of grief that refused to die. He hated that it still existed. He hated that her name still hurt to think about. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Lucas Rose opened the balcony doors and let the snow whip against his face. The sea roared below, black and merciless. "If this is what love costs," he whispered, "then I'm bankrupt." He stayed there until dawn, unmoving, watching the first light crawl across the Atlantic. When he finally returned inside, he walked past the shattered photo, past the note, past everything that tied him to the man he used to be. In the quiet of that morning, a new Lucas King was born, one who would never believe in love again. But fate has a cruel sense of irony, because across the river in Brooklyn, as Lucas erased his past, a young black woman named Nia Thompson was opening a letter of her own, a hospital bill, with her little brother's name printed in bold. 27, exhausted and stubbornly hopeful, she tied her curls into a bun and whispered, "I'll find a way." That way would soon lead straight to him. Back in Manhattan, Lucas shut off his phone and turned away from the sunrise. To the world, he was still the perfect billionaire, tailored suit, flawless posture, untouchable charm. No one knew that underneath the empire, his heart was nothing but frozen glass, waiting for one small crack. And cracks, as fate always proves, begin quietly. If this story has drawn you in, if you can already feel the chill of Lucas's loneliness and the distant warmth of the woman who will thaw, stay close. The next chapter begins where revenge meets fate, and one fragile smile changes everything. Subscribe, stay, and let the story unfold, because sometimes the coldest hearts hide the most unexpected miracles. The storm over Manhattan had cleared, but inside the 58th floor of King Global Tower, winter never left. Lucas King sat behind his glass desk, the skyline stretching out before him like a city built on silence. His phone buzzed with endless calls, board members, lawyers, journalists, all waiting for a reaction. He gave them none. The world expected a scandal, the billionaire betrayed, the empire collapsing, the grieving husband seeking revenge. Instead, Lucas returned to work the next morning, as if nothing had happened. His tie was straight, his voice precise, his eyes unreadable. When his assistant asked gently if he wanted the press release drafted, he said, "Only the less they know, the louder they'll talk. Let them." Every hour, every minute, he filled with movement, meetings, acquisitions, silent drives through the city at night. The rhythm kept him from remembering that there had once been laughter in that penthouse, that someone had once whispered his name, not for profit, but for love. In the first month after Sheila's death, he replaced half his executive board. In the second, he sold 3 subsidiary companies, just to remind himself he could still destroy something without flinching. People called it strategy. It was survival. The media spun stories. King's ruthless new era, the Ice King returns, a man who feels nothing but control. They weren't wrong. At night, when the office lights dimmed, Lucas would sit alone in his chair, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him, watching the city pulse below. Sometimes in the reflection on the window, he saw her face. Not the betrayer, not the liar. Just the woman who once tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and said softly, "You don't always have to be the strong one." He closed his eyes and forced her voice away. One evening, his assistant Laura lingered by the doorway. "Sir, the board has asked whether you'll be attending the shareholders' dinner next month. Madam Sheila's—" She stopped mid-sentence, realizing the name was a wound. Lucas looked up. "She's gone." "But her shares aren't, are they?" Laura hesitated. "No, sir. 40% still under her trust." He leaned back in his chair. his expression unreadable. Then I'll attend. Let's remind them who built this empire in the first place. He spent the next few days buried in numbers, profit margins, growth charts, international markets, all precision, no emotion. His colleagues said he was unstoppable, but they didn't see the truth. The harder he worked, the emptier he became. Late one night, while reviewing an internal audit, his gaze caught on a photo clipped to a report. It was from a charity gala years ago, him and Sheila smiling for the cameras. The caption read, "Power Couple of the Year." He almost laughed. Power, yes. Couple, never. He ripped the photo in half, the sound sharp in the stillness. Moments later, his phone vibrated again. A news notification flashed. Sheila King's Foundation announces new donors. There was a picture attached, Sheila's name glowing in gold, above a list of partners that included Andrew Cole. Andrew, his oldest friend, the man who had stood beside him at the wedding, the man who had once promised, "I'd take a bullet for you." Lucas shut his eyes. For the first time in months, his hands trembled, not from grief, from the weight of a truth that had never stopped hurting. He opened the drawer, pulled out the flash drive she'd left behind, and held it up against the light. He should have destroyed it long ago. Instead, he placed it back carefully and whispered, "You can keep your ghosts, Sheila, but I'll choose when they stop haunting me." By morning, the decision was made. He ordered the restructuring of all departments connected to her name, quietly, precisely. He didn't want noise. He wanted control. Every project, every contract that bore her signature would vanish from the company within months. When the legal team asked for confirmation, he said evenly, "If her legacy wants to breathe, let it find another host, not mine." But even as he cut away every thread that tied him to her, there was one he couldn't reach, the thread inside his own chest, the one that still remembered warmth. Weeks passed. The city thawed into spring. Lucas began spending nights at the office, sleeping on the leather couch in his private suite. He claimed it was efficiency. The truth was simpler. The penthouse had become too quiet, too clean. Every corner reminded him of something human he'd lost. He started walking home at sunrise, through the streets before the world awoke. Coffee vendors, delivery trucks, the smell of asphalt and bread, the scent of ordinary life he no longer belonged to. He envied it. One dawn, as he crossed Madison Avenue, a young man bumped into him, spilling coffee on his sleeve. The man stammered apologies, but Lucas barely heard them. He was staring at the cafe across the street, a place he used to go with Sheila on Sunday mornings. He turned away before memory could drag him under. By the time he reached his building, his assistant was already there, waiting with a folder. "Sir, one more item from HR," Laura said. "You mentioned wanting to find a personal aide before the shareholders' event." Lucas frowned. "I did? Yes. You said, and I quote, 'someone ordinary enough to unsettle the extraordinary.'" He almost smiled at that. It sounded like something a saner version of him might have said. "Fine. Bring me the list." That afternoon, he sat in the conference room reviewing candidate profiles. Dozens of polished faces, Ivy League glowing resumes, perfect smiles. He flipped through them mechanically until one stopped him. The photo was grainy, the woman's expression calm but unposed. Name, Nia Thompson. He skimmed her file, no degree, no LinkedIn, part-time work, at a diner, volunteer hours, at a shelter. A note from HR read, "Unremarkable background. Strong references. Polite. Real. Real." The word stayed in his head longer than it should have. Laura glanced at him. "Do you want to skip that one?" "Sir?" Lucas shook his head slowly. "No. Call her in." He closed the folder, eyes drifting toward the window again. Outside, the city shimmered beneath the fading sunlight, full of people who still believed in things like beginnings and love and second chances. He didn't. Not yet. But something, some quiet part of him, he thought had died, tilted its head toward the sound of that name. Nia Thompson. The name meant nothing. But somehow it felt like a breath in a room that hadn't known air for far too long. Lucas leaned back, letting the glass wall reflect his face, the man the world still called invincible. He looked at the reflection for a long time and whispered under his breath, "Let's see how far silence can take me before life decides to speak again." Outside, the sky turned the color of melted steel, and far away, in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, a woman folded her diner apron, tied her hair, and checked the time on her cracked phone screen. She had no idea her interview tomorrow would be the start of everything for both of them. The morning air over Manhattan carried a thin chill, the kind that clung to glass towers and lingered between breaths. Inside King Global Tower, Lucas King stood by the window, his reflection a perfect silhouette against the skyline. Behind him, the city moved in its usual rhythm, ambition humming like machinery. Inside him, there was no rhythm left, only precision. Laura entered quietly. "The candidate's here, sir." He didn't turn. "Which one?" "The last on your list." "Nia Thompson." A pause long enough for the air to shift. "Send her in," he said. Laura hesitated. "She's different from the others." Lucas's mouth curved a faint ghost of amusement. "Good. I'm tired of sameness." He didn't look up when the door opened. He heard soft footsteps, a careful exhale. Then silence, the kind of silence that didn't come from fear, but from someone who didn't want to disturb what wasn't theirs. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was gentle but sure, carrying a warmth the room had forgotten. Lucas lifted his gaze. The first thing he noticed wasn't beauty. It was calm. She didn't fidget, didn't perform. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. Her eyes, steady clear, met his without trying to impress or challenge. "Have a seat," he said. She sat, her back straight, her expression neutral but open. Lucas scanned her file, though he already knew it by heart. No degree, short-term jobs, limited experience in corporate structure. "I learn quickly," she replied. He glanced up. Most people would have defended their resume. "I don't think it needs defending." "It's true." The honesty in her tone startled him more than he'd admit. Most applicants wrapped their words in strategy, eager to show they could play the game. She didn't even seem to know there was one. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Why do you want this job?" Nia hesitated for a second, then said simply, "Because I need it." He arched a brow. "That's refreshingly unpolished." "I'm not very good at pretending," she said, with a small, almost embarrassed smile. "But I am good at showing up." Lucas tilted his head slightly, studying her. The light caught the curve of her face, the quiet steadiness in her posture. He couldn't name it, but something about her made the noise in his mind dim. He asked a few more practical questions, each answered clearly, briefly. She didn't oversell herself. When he asked about her weaknesses, she said, "I trust too easily," then added, "But I don't regret it." He wasn't sure if that was naivete or courage. The interview ended without ceremony. He stood expecting her to leave, but before she reached the door, she turned back. "If this is just a temporary position, I'm fine with that," she said quietly. "But I'd like to make the time count." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, then said, "It always counts." When she left, the scent of something faintly floral lingered behind. He didn't notice he was still standing, eyes fixed on the closed door. That afternoon, Lara appeared again with a hesitant expression. "Do you want me to shortlist others before finalizing?" Lucas shook his head. "No need." She blinked. "You've decided already?" "Yes." "On her?" He didn't answer directly. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the only one worth listening to. For the rest of the day, he tried to return to his usual focus numbers, contracts, meetings. But his mind kept drifting back to that brief moment in the interview. The way she said, "I'm not good at pretending." The way she didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. It had been years since anyone allowed silence to exist around him without trying to use it. By the time evening fell, he found himself walking into his private elevator, descending to the street. He didn't know why. The city's chaos was something he usually avoided, but tonight he needed to breathe something unfiltered. He stopped by a small cafe on Lexington Avenue, the kind of place where no one looked twice at anyone. The air smelled of coffee and old wood. He ordered black, no sugar. As he waited, his phone buzzed. A message from Lara Candidate confirmed. "She'll start Monday." He typed only 2 words. "Good, quiet." But as he slipped the phone into his pocket, he realized quiet no longer felt like enough. Monday arrived with rain that blurred the skyline. Lucas arrived early as he always did. He preferred being the first in the building, the calm before the world intruded. When the elevator chimed hours later, he barely glanced up. Then he heard a soft voice. "Good morning, sir." Nia stood at the doorway, rain droplets clinging to her coat, a small smile curving her lips. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late." There's a difference between punctuality and fear. "I'm not afraid," she said simply. For some reason, that answer unsettled him. He motioned to the desk by the window. "That's your space. You'll handle whatever I ask. If I don't ask you, don't assume. Understood? And if you make a mistake, I'll admit it." He nodded once. "We'll see." As the morning went on, she moved quietly around the office, learning her surroundings without asking questions. She didn't hover, didn't fidget, didn't fill the air with small talk. Yet every time she passed by the room, seemed less sterile. When he returned from a meeting around noon, a mug sat on his desk. Steam curled from it, black coffee, but slightly less bitter than usual. He frowned. "Who told you how I take it?" "No one," she said. "I guessed. You guessed correctly. Lucky guess." He wanted to say luck had nothing to do with it, but he didn't. Later, he caught her straightening the books on the shelf, not by size or color, but by subject, aligning them with quiet care. "You organize by logic," he said from behind her. She turned, startled. "Is that a problem?" He said softly. "It's unusual." At the end of the day, she gathered her things neatly. "Good night, Mr. King." He looked up from his screen. "You can call me Lucas." She hesitated. "That feels too familiar." "It's just a name," maybe she said with a faint smile. "But names mean something." When she left, the office felt strangely emptier. That night, Lucas sat alone by the window of his penthouse. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, golden veins pulsing through glass and steel. But instead of whiskey, there was coffee in his hand, the same subtle roast she'd brewed. He thought of her calm voice, her unflinching gaze. There was nothing strategic about her, nothing manipulative. She existed like a soft echo in a place built on noise. He didn't like it. He didn't want to like it. But he couldn't stop the thought that maybe, just maybe, the quiet wasn't as empty as he'd believed. Down below, New York glimmered with stories he'd stopped listening to. Somewhere among them was hers. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Lucas King, the man who had buried his heart beneath glass and concrete, was already listening. Rain streaked across the glass walls of the King Global Tower, each drop blurring the skyline into soft lines of gray and gold. Inside the office, the world was silent, but for the steady rhythm of fingers on a keyboard. Nia sat at her desk, her concentration absolute. The soft tapping filled the room like a metronome, gentle and consistent. Lucas, standing near the window, found himself listening to it, without realizing why. It was strange. The sound of someone working shouldn't have felt comforting. Yet somehow it did. He turned his gaze toward her. She wasn't aware he was watching. Her hair caught the faint light, her shoulders relaxed, her lips moving slightly as she read a line on the screen. There was nothing remarkable about the moment. No music, no cinematic pause. And still, Lucas couldn't look away. He cleared his throat quietly. "You're early again." Nia looked up, startled, a faint smile tugging her lips. "Old habits." "What kind of habits?" "The kind that come from having too much to lose," she said softly. "When you've disappointed people before, you learn to show up before they expect you to." Lucas hesitated, then nodded once. "You don't have to prove yourself here." "I'm not proving anything," she said, eyes lowering to the keyboard again. "I'm just trying to do things right." He studied her for a moment longer before turning back to his desk, but the echo of her words lingered quiet and unsettling. At noon, the building cafeteria buzzed with chatter, employees discussing quarterly targets and weekend plans. Nia sat alone at a small table near the corner, eating her salad while reading a spreadsheet on her tablet. A voice interrupted, deep and calm. "You're not obligated to work through lunch." She looked up. Lucas stood across from her, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened just enough to make him look human. "I don't mind," she said. "Numbers don't talk back." That's exactly why most people find them exhausting. He sat down before she could object. The entire room seemed to shift, conversations dimming. People rarely saw Lucas King in the cafeteria, let alone sitting with someone. "I didn't mean to make things awkward," Nia murmured. "You didn't," he said, glancing around briefly. "They just like a good story. And I'm apparently the wrong kind of entertainment." Her lips curved slightly. "Then why come here? To remind them I still exist." He picked up a fork from the table, poked absent-mindedly at his own untouched salad. "And to make sure you actually eat." Nia blinked. "You came to check on me." "Don't look so surprised. I expect my employees to survive the day." Her laugh was soft, genuine, and for a moment it felt like sunlight broke through the gray afternoon. Later that day, the office grew quiet again. The rain had stopped, replaced by a fog that wrapped the city in muted light. Lucas was reviewing a report when the scent of something warm drifted through the air. Carrot, a touch of thyme. He looked up to find a small container on his desk. "What's this?" Nia appeared at the doorway, holding another bowl. "Lunch. You didn't eat yours. I wasn't hungry. That's what people say before they pass out." He raised an eyebrow. "And you're concerned about my well-being. I'm concerned about efficiency," she said, tone even, but eyes teasing. "It's hard to run a company if the boss collapses." Lucas almost smiled. "Almost. You're unusually forward for someone new. Maybe that's because you're unusually difficult to ignore." The remark caught him off guard. He wasn't used to people speaking to him that way, not since before Sheila, before everything turned to glass and control. She left the container on his desk. "You don't have to thank me," she added. "Good," he said dryly, "because I wasn't planning to." But when she disappeared into the hallway, Lucas found himself opening the container anyway. The soup was simple, warm, slightly sweet, and annoyingly comforting. For the first time in months, He ate everything. Evening crept in slowly. Most employees had left. The building lights dimmed one floor at a time. Nia was still at her desk, typing quietly under the soft glow of a lamp. Lucas finished his final call, then looked over at her. "You're still here? I didn't realize the time. It's past 9. "I don't mind," she said, her voice low but unhurried. "Sometimes it's easier to think when everyone else is gone." He leaned against the edge of his desk, watching her. "You're not afraid of silence, are you?" "No," she said, glancing up at him. "Silence doesn't scare me. Pretending does." He wasn't sure what to say to that. The honesty in her words had a way of disarming him, like soft light sneaking through a closed door. After a pause, he asked, "Do you always tell the truth?" "I try to," she said. "It's easier to remember." Lucas let out a quiet laugh. "You'd be terrible in corporate politics. Then it's a good thing I don't plan to play." He looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Not flirtation, not even connection, but recognition. Two people standing on opposite sides of a wall, each sensing the other's loneliness through the cracks. When she finally packed her things and headed toward the elevator, he spoke again, his tone softer. "Nia." She turned. "Yes." He hesitated. "Thank you for the soup." Her smile was small but sincere. "You're welcome, Mr. King." After she left, he stood there for a long time, staring at the closed elevator doors. The quiet returned, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. That night, Lucas drove through the city without destination. He passed familiar streets, places that once meant something, the park where Sheila used to run the restaurant, where deals were sealed with champagne and lies. When he stopped at a red light, he saw a reflection in the glass of a passing bus, a man with tired eyes and a tie, loosened just enough to reveal the hollow underneath. Himself. He exhaled slowly. Somewhere between grief and exhaustion, something inside him had shifted, not healed, not yet, but no longer broken in the same way. Back in his apartment, the city lights spilled across the marble floors. He set his briefcase down, walked to the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. The soup was there, what was left of it, sealed neatly in a small glass jar. He didn't eat it. He just stood there for a while, staring at it, realizing that the strangest part wasn't the gesture itself. It was that someone had cared enough to notice he hadn't eaten. For a man who'd lived surrounded by luxury, power, and noise, that small act of care was the rarest thing of all. Lucas leaned against the counter, eyes distant. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the armor he'd built, something fragile stirred, like the first pulse of warmth beneath winter frost. And he wondered for the first time in years what would happen if he stopped running from the quiet and started listening to it instead. The city glittered that night, every tower crowned in gold. It was the kind of night Manhattan loved, sharp suits, glass heels, laughter that never reached the eyes. The King Global Shareholders Gala was not merely a celebration. It was a battlefield, wrapped in silk and champagne. Lucas King hated these nights. He hated the music, the staged smiles, the way every conversation hid an agenda beneath its perfume. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't here to hide. He was here to remind them who he still was. "Your car's ready, sir," Laura said, holding out the black coat he hadn't worn since before the funeral. He put it on wordlessly, buttoning each clasp with slow precision. As he did, his gaze fell to the reflection in the mirror. For a fleeting second, he saw a stranger, staring back, one who looked almost human again. Laura cleared her throat. "And your guest?" He paused. "She'll meet me downstairs." When he entered the lobby, Nia was already there, standing near the marble column beneath a chandelier that seemed too grand for the hour. She turned when she sensed him, and for a moment the noise of the world dimmed. Her dress was simple cream silk that caught the light like quiet fire. No diamonds, no glitter. Just her. Elegant in a way that defied the spectacle around her. "You clean up well," Lucas said, a faint trace of surprise in his tone. "So do you," she replied softly. "Though I'm guessing you hate every minute of this." "You guess correctly." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The gala was held at the Waldorf Astoria under a ceiling of glass and gold. Cameras flashed, laughter rang like rehearsed applause. Lucas walked in with the calm of a man who'd built the room and could burn it down if he wished. Nia kept close her steps, measured her gaze, steady even as whispers bloomed around them. Who is she, his new assistant, his replacement for the wife? The cruelty of gossip was nothing new to Lucas. What surprised him was how little it touched her. She didn't shrink, didn't fidget. She carried herself as if she belonged, not because she wanted to, but because she refused to apologize for existing. They made their way through clusters of people, each smile sharper than glass. Lucas nodded to a few, his expression unreadable. Then she appeared. Sheila. Or rather, the memory of her painted across the room in the form of a portrait unveiled by the board. The legacy founder. The woman who'd turned betrayal into myth. Lucas's jaw tightened. They really thought this was appropriate. Nia followed his gaze. "That's her." "Yes." His voice was quiet, cold. "That's the ghost everyone's still in love with." "She doesn't look like a ghost," Nia said. "Just someone who stopped seeing what mattered." Her words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Lucas turned to her, studying her expression, the calm certainty behind her eyes. For a moment he felt his own chest ease. "Would you like to dance?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Here, isn't that what people do at these things? I'm not sure you're the dancing type." "Neither am I," he said, offering his hand. "But maybe tonight I can pretend." She hesitated only a second before slipping her hand into his. The band began a slow jazz tune, the kind that wrapped itself around the heart. They moved on to the dance floor. The crowd parted, curious, their eyes sharp. Lucas placed one hand lightly on her waist, the other holding her hand. "You can still walk away," he murmured, "and let you dance alone in a room full of people waiting to see you fall." Not a chance. He couldn't help it. A small, genuine smile crossed his face. As they began to move, the murmurs softened into background noise. She was lighter than he expected, her steps unstudied, but graceful. He found himself matching her rhythm, letting her lead without realizing it. Nia looked up at him. "You don't strike me as someone who enjoys pretending." "I don't." "Then why tonight?" "Because sometimes," he said quietly, "you need to let them think they can still read you. It keeps them from asking the real questions." Her brows lifted slightly. "And what would that question be?" "What's left of me after her?" For a heartbeat she said nothing. Then softly, "Maybe not everything she took was worth keeping." He met her eyes, and for the first time in months, didn't look away. The song ended. Applause rippled through the room, polite, practiced. Lucas released her hand, but the warmth of her touch lingered. As they walked off the floor, a familiar voice stopped him. Lucas said a man behind them. He turned. Andrew Cole, the friend who wasn't, the friend who'd stood beside Sheila in the photographs on that cursed flash drive. Andrew. Lucas's tone was calm, but the air between them tightened. Andrew's smile was easy, too easy. "It's been a while. You look well." "I am well. And this must be..." Andrew glanced at Nia. his eyes assessing, dismissive. Your new protege. Lucas's jaw clenched. This is Nia. Andrew extended a hand. A pleasure. Nia shook it, her grip steady. Likewise. Something in her gaze made Andrew blink, like he'd expected a shy girl, and found a mirror instead. I hear you're still cleaning up the company, Andrew said lightly. Removing old ghosts, shall we say? Lucas's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, starting with the ones that talk too much. The conversation died right there. Andrew excused himself with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, and Lucas exhaled slowly, turning toward the bar. Nia followed but didn't speak. He poured himself a drink, fingers tightening around the glass. Does it bother you seeing him? She asked softly. It used to. He took a slow sip. Now I just wonder how people like that sleep at night. Probably the same way you used to, she said, before she could stop herself. He looked at her sharply, then surprisingly laughed. You're bold. Or honest. Sometimes they're the same thing. They stood there in silence, side by side. The music swelled again. Laughter rippled from across the room. To everyone else, they looked like a man and a woman sharing a drink. But to Lucas, it felt like something had quietly shifted a small fracture in the armor he'd built around himself. When the night finally ended, they stepped out into the cool air. The city lights shimmered against wet pavement, taxis blurring by. Thank you, Lucas said, his voice low. For what? For showing up. She smiled faintly. That's one habit I'm not planning to break. He opened the car door for her. She slipped inside, the scent of her perfume lingering, like something unfinished. As the car pulled away, Lucas stood there a moment longer, staring at the empty street. His reflection in the window looked less like a man in control and more like one learning how to breathe again. And though he would never admit it aloud, part of him already knew this night, this woman, this quiet shift wasn't just another distraction. It was the beginning of the end of his silence. The city was half asleep when the storm came. Lightning carved across the skyline, splitting the clouds into bruised ribbons of violet and gray. Inside his penthouse, Lucas King sat at the edge of the couch, sleeves rolled up, glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The storm didn't bother him. Silence did. He'd tried to sleep. He couldn't. Not after that night, the gala, the dance, the memory of her hand resting against his chest, steady, unafraid. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm in the chaos, soft where the world had grown sharp. He pressed a hand against his temple. This isn't me, he muttered. But even his own voice sounded uncertain. A sharp clap of thunder shook the windows. The lights flickered. Somewhere his phone buzzed. A message. He hesitated before picking it up. Nia. Sorry it's late. I left my notebook in your office. I'll pick it up tomorrow morning. Lucas stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He started to type. It's fine, but stopped. The thought of her walking through the storm tomorrow, soaked and shivering, irritated him more than he wanted to admit. He typed instead. The building's locked after midnight. You'll need clearance. A pause. Then her reply came quickly. Nia, I didn't mean now. It's just, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about that project proposal, and another lightning flash, another tremor of thunder. Then a knock. Lucas froze. He glanced toward the door, disbelief flickering in his eyes. The knocking came again, soft, uncertain. He rose, walked across the marble floor, and opened it. There she was. Rain clung to her hair, her coat soaked through. She looked small against the doorway, holding a brown paper bag in one hand and her broken umbrella in the other. I know, she said breathlessly before he could speak. You said not tonight. But the subway stopped and I was already halfway here, and… She trailed off, eyes searching his face for anger. I can go if it's a bad time. He didn't move. You walked here. Half of the way, yes. In this storm, I've seen worse. He exhaled sharply. You really don't listen. Not when I'm worried. Worried about what? That you wouldn't eat dinner? She said, lifting the bag slightly. So I brought soup. Lucas blinked, the air between them thick with the hum of rain and something unnamed. He stepped aside. You're impossible. I get that a lot. She walked in dripping water onto the pristine floor. He shut the door behind her. For a moment, the only sound was the soft patter of raindrops falling from her coat. Give me that, he said, taking the bag from her hands. The faint aroma of ginger and garlic filled the room. He placed it on the counter and turned to her. You're drenched. I noticed. He stared at her for a second, then disappeared down the hallway and returned with a towel. Here. Thanks. She began drying her hair, awkwardly. Lucas leaned against the counter watching her. You realize how insane this is, right? Walking through a storm for someone's dinner? She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just stubborn. He almost smiled back. Maybe you are. They ate in silence at the kitchen island, the storm outside roaring like a living thing. The soup was warm, simple, grounding. For a man who had everything money could buy, it was absurd how much that warmth mattered. Halfway through, she looked up. You were quiet today. I'm always quiet. Not like that. He raised an eyebrow. And how was it different? You looked lost, she said softly. Like you were in a room full of people but still couldn't find where you were. He didn't respond right away. Her words hit too close to something he'd buried. Finally, he said, Maybe I was. She nodded as if she understood. It's strange, isn't it? You can be surrounded by people and still feel like you're disappearing. Lucas's throat tightened. You talk like someone who's been there. Everyone's been there, she said quietly. The difference is, some people hide it better. Thunder rolled above them. The lights dimmed again. Without thinking, Lucas reached across the counter and took her wrist lightly, as if to steady her against the flicker of the storm. The contact was brief, but it sent a shock through both of them. When the lights steadied again, he released her hand slowly. Sorry. It's fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But she didn't move away. Minutes passed. Rain beat harder against the windows. The storm outside had grown wild, merciless. You should stay until it slows, he said finally. It's not safe out there. I don't want to impose. You already did, he said deadpan. You might as well finish the job. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You really don't know how to say thank you, do you? I'm learning, he admitted. She sat back on the stool, watching him in the dim light. Why did you stop believing in people? The question cut through the air like a blade. He met her eyes. I didn't stop. I just learned that people stop believing in you first. Her expression softened. Maybe you were believing in the wrong ones. Lucas looked away, jaw tightening. He hated how easily she got under his skin, how her words slipped past the walls he'd spent years building. When he finally turned back, she was watching the rain through the window. Her reflection in the glass looked distant, almost fragile. Do you ever miss her? She asked quietly. He didn't have to ask who her was. Every day he said, and I hate myself for it. She nodded slowly. You don't have to. Missing someone isn't weakness. It's proof that you once had the courage to care. He stared at her, unable to speak. Somewhere deep inside, Something cracked small, but real. A few minutes later, the clock struck midnight. The rain had softened a whisper now instead of a roar. "You can take the guest room," he said. "You shouldn't go home this late." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." His tone was firm, but not cold. "I'll have a car take you in the morning. All right." She rose, gathering her things. "Good night, Lucas." He looked up at her, her name on his tongue before he caught it. "Good night, Nia." When she disappeared down the hallway, the penthouse felt different, not warmer exactly, but alive. Lucas sat in silence, listening to the fading storm. The bowl on the counter was empty, the faint scent of ginger still lingering. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, sleep found him before dawn. Outside, the storm drifted east, leaving behind a city washed clean, and a man who unknowingly had just begun to thaw. The morning light crept gently through the penthouse windows, slipping across the marble floors like a secret. Lucas stirred awake to the faint scent of coffee and something warm, eggs, maybe, or toast. For a moment, disoriented, he thought it was a dream. Then he remembered the storm, the knock, the soup, her voice. He sat up slowly, pressing a hand to his forehead. It had been years since he'd fallen asleep without waking to the ghosts that haunted him. But last night, there had been no ghosts, only rain and her. When he entered the kitchen, Nia was there, hair slightly tousled, sleeves rolled up, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. The sight of her standing there barefoot on his polished floor felt impossibly domestic, like a scene borrowed from another man's life. "You're up," she said without turning around. "Apparently." His voice was rougher than usual. "You cook here now. I wasn't sure what your routine was, but I figured food was universal. Not in my world." She smiled, glancing over her shoulder. "Then maybe that's the problem." Lucas leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her move. There was something unhurried about her gestures, something that softened the edges of the sterile apartment. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, sliding a plate toward him, but it seemed less awkward than saying goodbye without breakfast. He stared at the plate, scrambled eggs, sliced fruit toast, perfectly golden. Simple but meticulous. He picked up a fork, more out of politeness than hunger, then took a bite. It was good. Too good. "This is dangerous," he muttered. "What is getting used to this?" Her laugh was quiet, almost shy. "Don't worry, I'm not planning to move in." He looked at her, then long enough for her smile to falter. "That's not what I meant." Their eyes held for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Then she broke it with a soft exhale, picking up her cup. "You should eat before it gets cold." He did, in silence. But it wasn't the old heavy kind that used to fill his mornings. This silence felt peaceful. When they finished, she gathered the dishes. Lucas caught her wrist gently. "Leave it. The housekeeper will handle it." She shook her head. "Old habits die hard." He hesitated, then let go. "You really don't know how to be still, do you?" "Stillness feels like waiting," she said, "and I've waited for enough things that never came." That answer, so ordinary, so human, lodged itself in his chest. He didn't reply. He just stood there, watching her rinse a dish that didn't need rinsing, his heart betraying him, one quiet beat at a time. By the time they reached the lobby, the storm had cleared completely. The air smelled new. The driver opened the car door, but Nia hesitated, her fingers brushing lightly against the strap of her bag. "Thank you for letting me stay." "You didn't give me much choice," he said, a ghost of a smile tugging his lips. "Maybe not." She met his eyes, the corner of her mouth lifting. Still thank you. He looked at her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. You make things difficult, you know that. In what way? In the way that makes me forget why I built walls in the first place. Her breath caught. Maybe walls aren't meant to last forever. He didn't answer. She climbed into the car, and as the door closed, he found himself standing there longer than necessary, watching until the black sedan turned the corner and disappeared into the Manhattan traffic. The day unfolded with its usual rhythm: meetings, signatures, calculated decisions, but Lucas couldn't focus. Every time his mind drifted, it went back to the kitchen. The sound of her laugh. The way she'd looked at him when she said stillness feels like waiting. That night he worked late, long after the last assistant had left. The city glowed below him, cold, brilliant, unforgiving. He stood by the glass, his reflection blending with the skyline, and thought about how much of his life had been spent pretending control was peace. His phone vibrated. A message. Nia. Just wanted to say the meeting files are on your desk. I fixed the formatting. Also, you left your watch at the office. Should I bring it tomorrow? He stared at the text for a moment before typing back. No. Keep it. It might remind you to stop working past midnight. Her reply came after a long pause. Nia. Then you'll have to find something else to remind you of the same. Lucas set the phone down, but the faint curve of a smile remained on his lips. 3 nights later, the world tilted again. It began with a call. Late. Unexpected. He almost didn't answer, but something instinct maybe made him pick up. Mr. King, the voice on the other end, was trembling. This is St. Luke's Hospital. We have someone here listed as your emergency contact, Nia Thompson. His breath caught. What happened? There was an incident on the subway platform. She fainted. It's probably exhaustion, but she's stable now. Lucas didn't wait for the rest. The line went dead as he grabbed his coat and keys, the elevator doors closing before his heartbeat even steadied. When he arrived, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain. The nurse at the desk recognized his name before he spoke it and gestured down the corridor. She was there, lying on the narrow bed, an IV hooked to her arm, her face pale but peaceful. For a moment, Lucas couldn't move. Something unfamiliar twisted in his chest, fear raw and unfiltered. He approached slowly, his steps quieter than his breath. Her eyelashes fluttered. You came, she murmured, voice hoarse. I was told you collapsed. It's nothing. Just low blood pressure, they said. Nothing doesn't send people to hospitals, he said sharply. She smiled faintly, eyes half open. You sound like you care. He exhaled, sitting beside her. Don't start with that. I wasn't starting anything, she whispered, just noticing. There was silence again, but this one was heavy, thick with everything unsaid. He looked at her hand resting near his, pale and small. Without thinking, he covered it with his own. Her pulse was weak but steady beneath his thumb. You should have told me you weren't feeling well, he said quietly. You would have told me to go home, and you would have ignored me anyway. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Probably. He didn't let go of her hand. For the first time, he didn't want to. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Neither of them counted. Finally, she spoke, eyes barely open. Lucas, have you ever thought about starting over? He froze. Starting over with someone new, she said softly. With something real. His heart clenched. I don't know how. Maybe that's the point, she whispered. You don't have to know. You just have to want to. Her eyes closed, then her breathing deepening into sleep. Lucas sat there long after the monitors steadied, long after the nurse peeked in, and quietly left again. When dawn broke, he was still there, her hand still in his. For the first time in his life, Lucas King didn't feel like a man controlling fate. He felt like someone quietly surrendering to it. And somewhere deep down beneath the cold shell and the ruin of old wounds, a single truth surfaced like light. Breaking through water, he didn't just want her to get better. He wanted her to stay. The hospital room was painted in muted beige, the kind of color meant to calm, but Lucas found no calm there. He stood by the window staring at the city beyond the glass, its skyline blurred by early morning fog. Behind him, the steady beeping of the monitor measured the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't his, yet somehow now dictated his every breath. Nia stirred. Her fingers shifted slightly against the blanket, and Lucas turned. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his in the pale light. "You're still here," she murmured. "I wasn't planning on leaving." Her lips curved faintly. "You should have gone home. It's past dawn." "I know." His voice was quiet but firm. "But I didn't want you to wake up alone." Something flickered in her gaze. Surprise. Warmth. Maybe both. She tried to sit up, but he stepped forward immediately, adjusting the pillows behind her back. Their hands brushed. Neither spoke. When she finally settled, she asked softly, "How long was I out?" 7 hours. "That long," he nodded. "You scared me." Her brows lifted slightly. "Scared you? That's new. Don't make fun of it," he said, almost smiling. "It's not something I'm used to feeling." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe it's about time you did." Lucas looked down, a small exhale escaping him. The honesty in her words felt like salt on an old wound, stinging, but necessary. Later that morning, after the doctor confirmed she could be discharged, Lucas handled the paperwork himself. Nia protested, of course. "I can take care of it. I know you can," he said, signing the last form. "But you don't have to." When they stepped outside, the air was crisp, fresh from last night's rain. Lucas held the car door open, and for a moment, she hesitated before getting in. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Taking care of things that don't belong to you." He paused, studying her face. "Who said you don't?" The question silenced her. She climbed in without another word. The drive back to Brooklyn was quiet. The city moved past in fragments, coffee carts steaming on corners, school children tugging on backpacks, couples crossing streets hand in hand. Normalcy. Something Lucas had long forgotten how to recognize. At one point, Nia turned her face toward the window and whispered almost to herself, "I didn't think you'd come." He glanced at her. "Then you don't know me at all." "I'm starting to," she said softly. That line stayed with him long after he dropped her off. Days passed. Slowly, imperceptibly, something between them began to shift. Nia returned to work after a few days of rest, but Lucas noticed the difference in himself, not her. He found excuses to linger by her desk, asking about schedules he'd already read, projects he'd already approved. He began remembering her small preferences, that she liked her tea with honey, not sugar, that she hummed softly when she concentrated, that she always tilted her head slightly before smiling, as if testing whether the world deserved it. Once during a late meeting, he caught her watching the rain outside the window instead of the presentation. "Bored?" he asked quietly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how rain makes people honest," she said. "It washes away everything we pretend to be." He didn't reply, but that night, as he stood by his own window, watching the rain fall over the city, he whispered to the reflection staring back, "Then maybe it's time." It happened 2 weeks later. She was in his office going over a report when she suddenly went pale. The papers slipped from her hands. "Nia." She shook her head. "It's fine. But before she could finish, she stumbled. Lucas caught her before she hit the floor. Hey, look at me, he said sharply. What's wrong? I don't know. Just dizzy. He lifted her gently onto the couch, his pulse hammering in his throat. When was the last time you ate? She tried to laugh weakly. You sound like my mother, and you're acting like a child. His tone softened. Stay still. He called the in-house medic who arrived within minutes. After a quick check, the man gave a slight frown. She needs rest, but it might be more than exhaustion. Lucas's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? The medic hesitated. It could be stress or hormonal changes. She should take a test to be sure. When the man left, Nia sat there, her expression unreadable. Lucas crouched in front of her. What did he mean by that? She looked down at her hands. I think you already know. The air between them turned still. Lucas searched her face, for denial, for a smile, for anything that could make this moment less real. But all he saw was quiet certainty and a trace of fear. How long? He asked, voice rough. I'm not sure. Maybe 6 weeks. He stood abruptly pacing. 6 weeks, he repeated as if testing the sound of it. That night, she didn't answer. He turned back to her eyes shadowed. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know how you'd react. How did you expect me to react? I don't know, she said softly. Maybe the same way you react to everything with silence. Her words hit like a blade. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. You think this is easy for me? No, she said. I think it's human, and that's what scares you. He froze, her calmness slicing deeper than anger ever could. Lucas, she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray her strength. I wasn't planning to ask you for anything. Not help, not money, not promises. I just wanted you to know. He stared at her. This woman who'd walked into his life quietly, who'd never demanded a thing, and who was now carrying something that would change everything. He felt the walls he'd built begin to crack. Finally, he spoke, voice low but steady. You think I could walk away from this? From you? You've done it before. Not with you, he said. Silence hung heavy in the room. He stepped closer, his tone softening. You don't understand, do you? You walked into my life when I was already in ruins. You didn't fix me. You reminded me I wasn't beyond repair. Her eyes glistened. Lucas. He shook his head. No. You listen now. I don't know what kind of father I'll be or if I deserve to be one. But I know this. I'm not leaving. The words seemed to fill the room, settle into its corners. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly she reached for his hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Then, don't just stay, she whispered. Believe it. He looked down at their intertwined hands, the first thing that felt real in years. Outside, the storm began again, soft at first, then stronger, wrapping the city in its restless hum. Lucas glanced toward the window, then back at her. Looks like we're both about to learn how to weather things. She smiled through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. And as thunder rolled above Manhattan, Lucas King, the man who once believed love was weakness, realized that sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was surrender. Not to power, not to revenge, but to something fragile, terrifying, and profoundly alive. To love. The world seemed to move slower after that night, every hour carrying a weight it hadn't before. Lucas found himself checking on Nia more often than he meant to, lingering outside her office door just to hear her voice. He'd never been that man, the one who needed someone close, simply to breathe right. but now he couldn't imagine the silence without her. The first doctor's appointment changed everything. They sat together in the waiting room, surrounded by the faint hum of monitors and the rustle of medical charts. Lucas's fingers drummed against his knee. His usual calm, replaced by an edge he didn't understand. Nia reached over and placed her hand on his. "You don't have to be nervous." He looked at her, incredulous. "I'm not nervous." Her lips curved. "You're tapping like you're timing a business merger." He stopped instantly. Force of habit. "Maybe try a new one," she said softly. "Like breathing." When the doctor finally called them in, Lucas followed her inside, every step tighter than the last. The room smelled of antiseptic and paper. The doctor smiled warmly, turning the monitor toward them. "Let's take a look." And then, there it was. The faint, fluttering rhythm of a heartbeat multiplied 4 times over. Nia's breath caught. Lucas froze. 4, the doctor said gently, as if she already understood the disbelief written on their faces. Quadruplets, all strong, all holding steady. For a long time no one spoke. Then Nia let out a trembling laugh, tears welling in her eyes. 4. Of course it would be 4. The universe really doesn't do things halfway with you, does it? Lucas couldn't speak. He just reached for her hand and held it tight, desperate, terrified. When they left the hospital, the city lights glowed like 1,000 promises waiting to be believed. Lucas didn't drive straight home. He parked near the East River, the night air crisp and damp, and turned to her. 4, he said quietly. "That's impossible." "So was us," she replied. He exhaled, the tension breaking into something halfway between laughter and awe. "Do you realize what this means?" "Yes," she whispered. "It means life doesn't wait for you to be ready." Weeks turned into months. Nia's body changed, her strength tested in ways neither of them expected. Lucas changed too, his sharp edges blunted by sleepless nights spent reading pregnancy books by early mornings when he drove her to checkups before dawn. He canceled meetings, turned down interviews, and started working from home more often. His board hated it. The media speculated endlessly, but Lucas didn't care. For once, his life wasn't about power. It was about presence. One night, when the city outside was quiet and she couldn't sleep, Nia found him sitting in the nursery, unfinished, but already warm. He was assembling a crib, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled. "You're doing it wrong," she said from the doorway. He looked up, smirking. "You could have said that 20 minutes ago. I wanted to see how long it would take before you admitted defeat." "Never," he said. "I've faced billion-dollar mergers. I can handle screws." "Uh-huh," she teased, stepping closer, "and yet the crib's upside down." He glanced at the frame and laughed quietly. "So it is." Their laughter filled the room, the kind of sound that made everything else disappear. He set down the screwdriver and walked to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've done a lot of things in my life," he said softly. "But this feels like the first thing that actually matters." Nia's eyes glistened. "You'll be a good father, Lucas. I'm still trying to be a good man," he admitted. "But maybe the two aren't so different." The day the babies arrived, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell over Manhattan, turning the city silver. Inside the hospital, time moved differently, slower, heavier, sacred. Lucas paced the hallway, hands trembling, heart thundering against his ribs. Every sound from the delivery room cut through him like a blade, every silence even more so. Then, at last, a cry. Then another, and another, and another. 4 voices. Tiny, fragile, alive. When the nurse finally emerged, smiling beneath her mask, Lucas could barely speak. "Are they all healthy?" she said. and the mother's asking for you. He didn't remember walking, only arriving. Nia lay there pale but radiant, her hair damp against her forehead. Around her, 4 small miracles slept beneath soft blankets. Lucas approached slowly as if afraid to wake them, or to wake from this moment. "They're so small," he whispered. "They'll grow," she said tiredly, smiling. "Just like us." He sat beside her, his hand trembling as he touched one of the tiny hands. The baby's fingers curled around his. Lucas swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do this." "Yes, you do," she said gently. "You start by being here." And he was. Months passed, the penthouse transforming into a home chaotic, alive, full of laughter and cries that echoed through the glass walls. Lucas learned to hold bottles instead of contracts, to change diapers instead of deadlines. He was clumsy, awkward, but completely devoted. Sometimes when all 4 babies finally slept, he'd stand by the window holding Nia's hand, watching the city below. He'd whisper, "I used to think love was a risk, something that made you weak." And now she'd ask, "Now I think love is the only thing that ever made me strong." One quiet evening, almost a year later, they returned to the same riverside where everything had begun. The sunset painted the water gold, and Nia leaned against him, their children giggling in a stroller nearby. Lucas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Nia froze. "Lucas." He opened it, revealing a ring. Simple, elegant. The band engraved with 4 tiny initials, their children's names. "I spent years trying to control everything," he said, softly. "But every good thing that ever happened to me was something I never planned. You, them, us." Her eyes shimmered with tears. "Lucas." He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I don't need perfection anymore. I just need what's real. And that's you." Her voice broke. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, the world stilled, the wind, the water, the noise of the city. Everything faded into quiet, like even the universe was listening. Then he kissed her, slow, certain, grateful. Later that night, as they put the babies to sleep, Lucas whispered to Nia, "I used to believe I couldn't be a father, that I wasn't built for love." Nia smiled, brushing her fingers against his cheek. And now, he looked down at the sleeping faces of their children, then back at her. "Now I believe in miracles." Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, alive, imperfect, endless. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive when you're ready. It arrives when you've lost everything else and still dare to open your heart. And when it does, you don't need to chase forever. You just need to stay. If this story touched your heart, share it. Somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded that broken hearts can still build whole lives. Comment what part moved you most, and tell us, do you still believe in second chances?